You're listening to Forward Faster, bite-sized insights for entrepreneurs.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Forward Faster podcast. This is Matt Foley. I'm the director of Startup Incubation here at NextCorps. And today I'm joined by Aaron Newman, who is a serial entrepreneur here in the Rochester area and who has a number of successful companies under his belt, including CloudCheckr, Techrigy, DbSecure, and more. So welcome to the podcast, Aaron. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. So always good to catch up and talk to entrepreneurs.
Yeah, likewise. So I guess you have a storied career. You want to kind of take us through your journey as a startup founder, where you started and where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing startups for, I think, 20 years now. I mean, I didn't intentionally get into it, right? I graduated college accounting and said, I don't want to do this. Started doing some software jobs, and I really just took to it, right? I actually really enjoyed building software. 1998 was an interesting time where this was the original dot-com bubble where just everything from valuations and tech was just so it was so overblown. I was working for a company and I said, a friend of mine there, we said, let's go start our own company, right? We were just young enough and naive enough to think that we could do it. But we were the right place, the right time, right? So we started a company around doing database security, securing databases for big corporations, just doing kind of vulnerability assessment, inventory management, things like that. And we saw other people doing similar stuff around operating systems and networks. So let's try it around databases. We went for it, and just right time, right place. Within 6 months, we got acquired. So we might have had one or two customers at that point. So
now, was that a service business or was that a software business?
Software business. I've always done software. I am a software guy. I don't know how to do anything else. I don't know how to do services. Anything in the physical world, is like magic to me. I don't know how real things get built.
Okay. So you did that, right place, right time. You exit 6 months later. Then what came next?
And so from that point, I mean, I always say your first startup is the hardest, right? Because you don't have the credibility yet. You don't have the resources, things like that. So I moved to Atlanta to work for the company that acquired us, which went from, $1 billion valuation and like 10 million in revenue. This is how things did at the time. It went up to a $4 billion valuation, and just happened to exit out of the shares that we had at the right time. So again, all the things aligned properly, took everything I made there and pumped it into the next startup. Okay. So kind of did a new iteration of database security with a little different stuff going on, built that, got it funded. That company was Application Security Inc. So we got it funded, ended up taking $22 million of funding over 5 years, ran it to about 200 people, and lots of ups and downs there. Right. So that was probably the one that looks like it was pretty successful, but it had a lot of challenges. So I didn't get a big payday out of that one, but took what I did get out of that one and pumped it to the next one. So it's always been do a startup, what you get out of it, you invest in the next one.
Okay. And so you did that. And then what was it? Techrigy after that? Is that right?
Yeah. Actually, the first two were based out of New York City. Then okay. I had children and I didn't want to live in New York City anymore. So ended up moving back to Rochester. And my ex-wife was from here. And we started a new company, Techrigy, which was totally different, right? Rather than database security, which the first two were around, this was social media listing. Okay. So because social media was brand new, this is 2006, social media was just getting started. And that's the one thing I really enjoy doing in part of the creative process of starting a company is finding something brand new that people kind of look at you weird, like, why are you going to do that? Right? That's always my sweet spot, right? I enjoy doing things that are really on the bleeding edge. So 2006, nobody thought about Facebook as a business tool. Nobody thought about Twitter or any of those as business tools. And I said, maybe these would be pretty useful in terms of sending messages, measuring sentiment, all that. So we built a company, Techrigy, here in Rochester, Built it to about 15 people, and then 4 years later sold it to a UK-based company.
And then same thing, you rolled the money from that into what? Was CloudCheckr next after that? Okay.
Yep. And CloudCheckr was, again, it was another pivot where 2011, it was kind of, people were just starting to talk about the cloud. And again, I like to gamble on what the next thing is. And cloud was, AWS was just emerging as a relevant force. Still, especially being here in Rochester, people would look at me like, no, we're never moving to the cloud. We don't trust that. It's not, it just doesn't match to what we want. And I was like, well, I feel like really everything's going to eventually go to the cloud. And we've seen that over, almost 9 years now, but started CloudCheckr and, scaled it for 5 years just on myself and my co-founders' funds, built it to about 50 people. And then we sold a big chunk of it, 2/3 of it, to private equity company 3 years ago out of New York City. And they did a $50 million investment, and, it's scaled up now. So that's a couple hundred people here in Rochester. It's one of the leading cloud management tools. So very fortunate. Again, the gamble I made was turned out. So very happy with that.
And so you're still in that to an extent. And then what's next?
Well, that's funny because, when we first started, when you kind of introduced me to let's do this podcast, I did a new startup. I'm trying to be hands-off.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm being successful or not, but I'm trying to be hands-off, where I build the team, put a team together, put an idea together, put some vision around it, get some funding, and let it run, and then just advise it, right? And that company was a company called Blockwatch, which was kind of my game is always, find what the next emerging technology is, invest in it. And it was, how do I monitor enterprise blockchain applications, right? So now what happened was we ran for about a year and a half, and we were like, yes, blockchain's emerging. It still hasn't emerged.
Yeah.
Right. So we actually pivoted. 6 months ago, we pivoted, right? So it's also the ability to say, hey, you know what? It's not going to emerge on the scale and the time frame we need. So what are we going to do?
Okay.
Right. So we actually we took all the technology and just pivoted it back into database security, which I had done in 2 other startups, but this time cloud database security. So it's a little hybrid of CloudCheckr pulling in my other startups around database security. So cloud databases. So, and now that's actually starting to really take off, and there's a good market there and all that. So one of the takeaways is, it's smart. You're not that smart, right? You try something, you fail, and you move quickly.
That brings up a question. So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you look out when you're trying to select your next idea, you're looking out for trends, or like what goes into deciding which idea to move forward with?
Well, it's, probably every time I start a company, it's a good 3 to 6 months of just start reading. What are the trends look like? What's the emerging technology? Is the emerging technology going to be relevant, or is it hype?
Okay.
And just kind of sifting through it and understanding. And again, it's not a perfect science, right? It's much more of an art, because again, if you read everything from Gartner was, dead set on enterprise blockchain is going to be a $3 trillion business. Right. And everybody's convinced enterprise blockchain is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And I bet on that. Right. And it just hasn't turned out. It may still come to fruition.
Yeah.
But it may be 5-10 years from now. And when you take funding, you have to be really careful about not using all your gunpowder.
Yeah.
Before you could be successful. So we had to pivot.
So timing definitely is a factor in success. And you mentioned earlier luck. What are the things you think can tip the scales in the favor of being successful as a startup founder?
Well, so first of all, let's start with ideas don't mean anything, right? I know people come to me, they're like, this is my idea and it's so valuable, I don't want to share it with people. Ideas are a dime a dozen. You can come with ideas constantly, right? It's really the execution and the timing that are the 2 critical pieces, right? Is one, every idea has to be the right time for that idea, right? Like enterprise blockchain, might be a good idea, or it might not be, but it certainly isn't a good idea today. Right. So it's just monitoring enterprise blockchains when there's no enterprise blockchains in production is not a big business. Right. You understand that, right? So the timing was off. So we got the timing wrong. But then the execution is also important, and just the ability to know when you have it wrong. Right. There's a difference between don't give up and going after the wrong thing. Right. So that's where you have to balance that, because startups are about just really, you have to bear down and keep going even when things are gloom. Yeah. But you want to do that in a way where you're not just going after something that could never work.
And how do you do that? Tell me, dig deeper on that. Like what's that process like internally? What do those conversations look like where you're trying to figure out, are we wrong here, or do we need to pivot? What is that like?
I mean, it's tough. Listen, let me go back to Techrigy. Techrigy was a social media listing platform that we built for PR agencies, right? It originally, the first iteration of it was backing up your blog online. It was actually a company. We built a product, blog backup online. And, so the same idea, you're collecting all this content. It's just, what do you do with the content? Are you backing it up? Are you doing analysis of it? What are you doing? So it's the same technology. So if you have to throw away all your technology and start from scratch, that's painful, right? You can't make that mistake too many times. If you know collecting all this social media content and then doing something with it and then you have to figure out what use case, right? So, and it's painful because once you have sunk costs, you don't want to go away from them, right? It's very hard to do that, but you have to, you have to kind of make that play. And that's what we did with Blockwatch, was just, we dragged it out. I mean, I probably knew 9 months before we have officially pivoted that we really should pivot, but, all the sales guys were like, well, I'm about to close some sales. Right. And, any minute now. And because they are, their job is to stick with it, grit, you dig through it, but then you have to step back and say, are we wasting our time? And can we point at this thing rather than that thing and be more successful? But you don't want to thrash, right? So many people end up thrashing too, is this week I'm going to do this. Next week I talk to a different customer. I'm going to be this. And then I talk to another customer. I'm going to be this. That's a bad thing too. So it's balance, and it's gut, right? I mean, a lot of people actually say, oh, in all your startups, you must be so data driven and you must be so analytical. And I say yes, but it's not true, right? It's all gut, right? It's kind of, you look at it and you read and you say, does that sound right? And, and you just kind of get that. And, maybe that's the one thing that I do think I could do fairly well, is you kind of use the gut of, something doesn't feel right? Blockchain, enterprise blockchain. We'd go to conferences and we'd be on panels with 6 other people, and everybody's saying enterprise blockchain is taking off and it's going to be so huge. But then when you sit back and something in your gut says, everybody keeps saying it's going to be huge, but it's not huge. It's not huge. It's not huge. And eventually your gut has to say, we got to do something else. Because like I said, Gartner did a white paper that said this is going to be a $3 billion market in 5 years. Yeah. Right. So your analytics would say, go after blockchain and just keep going after it. But your gut has to say, it's not happening right now. So we got to look at something else.
But you didn't scrap all the code, like you said. It's more repositioning what you had already done, because there was kind of a sunk cost there, right? It's repositioning what you've done just in a new market, a new space. Is that right?
Exactly. Because we had written a bunch of agents that collect data. We had written a UI that was a dashboard. We had written a data store. We had written these collectors, so we had it all. But rather than pointing at blockchain applications, we said, let's point it at databases and let's use it for a security use case. Right. So it's not like every line of code, but 80% of what we built, we could point at this new use case.
You mentioned you've done a bunch of software companies now. Why software? So for somebody listening, why should somebody start a software company?
Well, I think that's actually a really good question, right? The fact is, the vast majority of economic value that's going to be generated over the next 50 years in this world is going to be done using software and IT. Mm-hmm. Right? The fact is, manufacturing, there's just not a whole lot of value, additional value. Manufacturing is now a bit of there's a set number of chairs, and now you're just all wrestling for which chair. It's like musical chairs. The number of chairs are reducing with manufacturing because it's getting more efficient and less players. You don't want to play that game, right? You want to play a game where things are growing, right? You want to find the place where all boats are rising. And I like to say cloud software is good. Cloud software is even better because even the people that do an awful job in cloud end up successful, right? And so pick that space to be in where all boats are rising and then be the best one there, right? But still, you don't want to be in a market where things are lackluster and you're fighting to be the best person and only a small sliver of people are going to be successful. So software is where the market values, market value is going to be driven over the next 50 years out of software. Look at the 5 largest market cap companies in the world: Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook. These are all software companies. That's where the future is. So don't align yourself in something that is just an uphill battle. Choose the easier battles.
Just to clarify though, when you say cloud, is SaaS do you differentiate between those two, or is it just kind of one the same?
Well, I mean, again, that's a good question. I mean, anything you could do where you're in this virtual world is really where the economic value is being written. Specifically, and we might be past that point, but specifically 5 years ago, if you were building anything around AWS, it was just super hot, right? It was so successful and so high, and it still is. But now kind of everybody's glomming on, and so it's becoming harder to differentiate. But if you were smart and just 5 years ago, you said, let me start building something around AWS, whether it's service practices, managed services, whether it's consulting services, whether it's software products, whether it's whatever it was, you ended up successful.
Yeah.
Right. It was, and so being able to go after this space is a huge factor.
Yeah. So it brings up a point, because when you're kind of trying to pick an idea, right? So you built around AWS, which is this existing platform, but that introduces also that platform risk, right? What if they go and build something that's similar to yours and they suddenly start competing with you? What do you see as the kind of the benefits? And I know a bunch of startups have built like Slack apps as an example, right? And trying to build on top of an existing platform. What do you see as some of the benefits and drawbacks of going with that approach versus just building software that exists independent of a platform?
Well, I mean, it has to be big enough, right? I mean, it's a tough world to just build apps on top of Slack, right? Because it's just not a big enough market, right? And I guess, AWS is just giant. But it also, if I look back when we started this in 2011, AWS was small. So it was that risk also was, is this going to be large enough to support us? And luckily, AWS is, 50 times what it was in 2011. Yeah. So, we made the right bet. We were there. So versus Slack is a tough one. Can Slack really be 100 times where it is today in 10 years? I mean, that's a harder one because everybody's already on Slack, right? So, and, similar thing, trying to build things on top of Zoom is a tough one. Because, you don't have a huge enough space for a ton of people. I mean, there certainly can be a handful of people being successful there, but like with AWS, you just have hundreds of companies that could be successful in that ecosystem, and maybe Azure's the next one, right? Who knows, right? Azure is taking off, really well.
Yeah.
But, back in 2011, there was a lot of people, we made the right decisions and we're fortunate. But a lot of people, like the analysts, again, were pushing us to say, you shouldn't just focus on AWS. You should focus on multi-cloud and supporting all the clouds. And we didn't do that. I don't even know why we didn't do that. Again, I think a little just gut and instinct, and we were being successful with one. But if we would have tried to be a platform for all clouds, we would have been a lot less successful.
So
we're very
focus
fortunate.
is a big part of success there, just focusing on the one.
Yeah, despite the fact that every analyst told us we were wrong, and this is, you need to be multi-cloud, and it's a mistake to just focus on AWS, but
Okay.
it worked out.
So again, trusting your gut and focus, kind of two principles there. Now, all of your startups, did you have a co-founder for all of them?
Yeah, I've pretty much always had a co-founder, right?
Okay.
And it's been different co-founders over the years, and different dynamics, but it's always good to have somebody there to round yourself out, and just as well, for instance, with CloudCheckr, I think myself and my co-founder Aaron Klein, we're very aligned in a couple different ways. One is, for instance, when you're at a startup, it's very manic behavior. Right? One day, this is the worst thing ever and can never be successful. The next day, you feel like, oh my God, this is going to be the biggest thing since sliced bread, and how can we fail?
Yeah.
Right? Very manic, and so that's why a lot of people can't do it, because it's just too much stress and emotions and all that. So we would be aligned somehow, where the days where I thought that CloudCheckr could never work, what are we thinking? He would be on the other side.
Yeah.
Being like, no, this is perfect. Everything's going well. So, and then when he was on the bad side, I'd be on the good side. So we really, to have somebody there almost for emotional support is a big piece.
Somebody has an idea for a software company and they're solo at the moment. Should they take the time and go and find a co-founder before they go too far? Or should they just say, no, I'm just going to go as fast as I can today and find a co-founder eventually? Like, is it worth waiting to find somebody?
I think you should be going. I think you have to execute, right? So you should be going and just trying to get your stuff done as soon as possible, right? But you go get a co-founder as soon as you can.
Okay.
Right? I mean, if you're not a technical person, so many people I know, things you definitely don't want to do, particularly if you're a software company. Don't be outsourcing building the product, right? It just never works, right? Go find a technical co-founder. Or if you're a technical co-founder, or if you're a technical founder, go find a business person, right? And and you have to learn how to do that. So many times I see people that struggle with that concept: a technical guy who thinks he can run the business too, or a business person that thinks the code is simple and I could just hire some people to write it in their spare time.
Mm-hmm.
Neither are right.
Neither. Okay. So ideal team for starting a software company: a technical person and a business person, sounds like.
I think that's an ideal.
Okay.
Ideal. But, different things work for different people. So, yeah. But that seems to be the right strategy I see work.
Okay. And then you, it sounds like one of your businesses took on venture capital, right? And then the other ones were more bootstrapped from previous exits. What thoughts or recommendations would you have for people listening in terms of, should they raise funds, and if so, when is a good time for them to raise money?
Well, I mean, so I've pretty much done every different strategy, right? Angels, bootstrapped, private equity, VC. The fact is, it's very hard to raise money.
Okay.
Right. So even today, after 5-6 startups, it's still tricky. I hear a lot of no's.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I don't know how a person that's fresh out of the gates, first startup, gets to a yes. Right. It's a really tricky thing to do. So I think you have to come in with the mindset of, how am I going to get this off the ground without raising money? And yes, you should try to raise money. You should go through the motions. You should put your best effort in. But fundamentally, come up with a business plan and a strategy for getting as far as you can before you ever need to raise money. And, it's like, listen, if you're fresh out of Stanford, you're the great whiz kid and you live in the Bay Area, maybe you could just go out there and people are throwing money at you. But we're in Rochester, New York, right? It's a lot harder, unless you are way smarter than everybody else. You should expect you're going to have to do the startup the hard way, which is, working harder, elbow grease, grit. That's how a startup is successful. Because again, the idea doesn't really matter. Not that it doesn't matter, but ideas are not that unique or interesting. It's that how can you build a team? How can you get customers to care about it? How can you build the product? Those are the things. And almost any really good team can be successful. They just try enough ideas.
You've had a bunch of exits now. At what point did you know it was like, if you're going along and you say, did you decide that you wanted to exit, or was it something where the opportunity came to you, or like, how did you decide that it was time to get out of one of the businesses?
Well, I mean, it's very hard to sell the company. You have to wait for somebody to come along.
Okay.
Right. And so, I don't know how many failed acquisitions I've had. A lot of failed acquisitions, but probably like 5 to 1 failed acquisitions. So, you really have to realize that the one thing I've learned over the years is every acquisition is probably going to fail at the end, fall apart at the end. So
just to be clear, you mean like people that approached you, they got to due diligence type of thing and then it just fell apart? Is that what you're talking about?
Okay. Exactly.
Okay.
So many times that's happened. And so, you just have to realize that when you're doing an acquisition, chances are it's not going to go through. So you just keep running the business, you keep, the other, you have to have 10 meetings before you get one successful one. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't mean don't do meetings because 9 out of 10 are a waste of time. It means start doing the meetings and get the 9 out of the way so you can get to the one successful one.
Okay.
And it's the same thing with acquisitions, right? Is the vast majority of them are going to fail. At least they have in my experience.
Yeah.
So start working on those failures and eventually you'll win it. Yeah. You'll get one that works, but expect they're going to all fall apart at the last minute.
You mentioned earlier too, and as part of your story, you did 2 companies in New York, and then the rest of the companies have been up here in Rochester. Tell me about the experiences of starting and growing companies in the 2 very different areas. Like, what do you see as the benefits and drawbacks of each?
Yeah, I mean, being out of New York City is a lot more expensive. It requires, more capital, but you have a richer talent pool to pull from, people that have done it before. So, I mean, there's different angles that you take when you do that. And these days, it's a lot less important because of everything's got more remote and everything's, your communication mechanisms are way better than it was 20 years ago. So, so it's less critical. I mean, there is a natural clustering in these mega cities, because, if you want to go hire a product manager that's done a SaaS application in Rochester, New York, it's hard to do.
Yeah, it's tough.
Right? Yeah. Because how many of them are there in Rochester? Between 1 and 10 versus in New York City, there's thousands of them.
Yeah.
Right. So in Rochester, you have to be a little bit more aware of the fact that you're going to have to hire people that don't have the skills and do a little bit of training and work with them and build. But on the other hand, when you do find somebody here in Rochester and you're successful, they're very loyal. They stay around forever. Yeah. They're able to live a much better lifestyle here, and so their ability to work for you and their productivity is better. So there's ups and downs, but I always go to investors and I tell them how it's a competitive advantage to be in Rochester, because my competitors who are in Boston are paying 4 or 5 times for their office space. Their software engineers are double what they cost here in Rochester. They're getting high churn because, as soon as they hire them, somebody else is coming along to try to steal them away. Versus in Rochester, people are they're much more loyal. So it's competitive advantage, but there's goods and bads.
So you've been a huge proponent of growing software here in Rochester. I mean, what do you think we need to be doing as a region to grow our software community?
Well, a lot, right? I mean, it's very hard. I actually have formed a nonprofit called Scale FLX, Scale Finger Legs, because it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg, right? We don't have software here because people can't move here that are software have experience because there's no software here, right? Yeah. So it's chicken and the egg. And how do we break that? right? Is we need to seed that at first. And how do we create an emerging software hub here? I mean, our economy today in Rochester is based on 3 pillars, right? Agriculture, which is not going to grow much, manufacturing, which is just going to continue to shrink, and photonics, which is imaging photonics, which is a healthy industry, but just not at a scale enough to move the economic numbers here in Rochester. So software IT is one that could really save the region.
Okay.
Right. And we have educated population here. We have smart people, but we just don't have the understanding and the skill base, the experience around it.
Okay.
Right. So how do we get the experience here? We have to start drawing companies like Datto here. We have to start encouraging people like CloudCheckr and other ones to be successful here. We need organizations like NextCorps, but we probably need like 10 NextCorps here.
Okay.
Right? That's what it comes down to, is how do we build that critical mass?
Yeah. So is that what you're trying to do with Scale FLX, is just get that critical mass here and recruit people here?
Yep. And one of the projects that we're actually working on is we've been working with MCC to say we should be offering an AWS certification class, right? We should be training people to do that, right? Because half of it is you got a young person going into MCC and they're going to look at all the choices and they don't see Amazon Web Services in the list of choices.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to go after Amazon Web Services. So, but that's where the future is in these type of things. So we need to help get everything from MCC teaching cutting edge cloud courses and whatever the next thing is. We need the chamber to be the Chamber of Commerce to be focusing on how do we encourage software companies. We need the county and the city to understand the language of software. Right now, most of the organizations, they understand the language of manufacturing, which is, okay, I need large capital outlays for big equipment, and I need this and I need that. Very different language and very different how those organizations can help foster a software environment.
Yeah.
So we need to relearn our how we talk here, our definitions of, and how we think about businesses.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of wrapping things up, what recommendations would you give to somebody who's maybe early on or a little bit into starting a software company here in the region? I mean, what are maybe three big pieces of advice that you'd give to those folks?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about execution. I mean, make sure your idea is reasonable, right? I mean, it's hard to, every idea can work, but, find an idea and bounce it off. Make sure it's a reasonable idea, and be ready to evolve it and tweak it and come up with, but much more important than the idea is just execute on it. Go do it. And if you're going to fail quickly and then either pivot it or find something new to do. So I think that's the biggest piece, is just don't sit around talking about it. Go figure out how to get it done. Go figure out how to get your initial customers. Don't just anticipate somebody's going to come with a bucket of money and give it to you. Figure out how to do it with, being scrappy, right? Everything from guerrilla marketing to, using equity to bring in people to partner with you to, how do I get those first 10 customers? Because those are the hardest ones, right? Yeah. So, just, that grit here and Rochester is a great place to do it. But you have to do a little bit of work to find the other people who understand and can help you and mentor you and be successful. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Aaron. Thanks for joining us today. This has been super, super helpful. If people have questions or they kind of want to follow what you're doing, what would be a good way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron at newman-family.com.
Okay.
Or go check me out. I mean, I'm on Facebook, and I'm always pushing stuff out there on what's going on in the local community. So
awesome. Well, thanks. So that's it for this episode of Forward Faster. If you want to check out past episodes, go to nextcorps.org/podcast, or go to iTunes or Spotify and search for NextCorps Forward Faster. Thanks for joining us.